everybody. This is Carol Maletta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. Today, we're joined by Shannon Addison, creator of My Crumby World, a brand dedicated to empowering young girls to embrace their individuality and navigate the complexities of growing up. I know we all remember that. Shannon brings her unique perspective as a passionate advocate for connection, inspired by her own journey of parenting through peer cruelty. Together, we're going to dive into the effects of girl cruelty, how to recognize if your daughter might be struggling or if she's even the mean girl, and talk about strategies to support her mental health and resilience. So welcome, Shannon. I am looking forward to talking about this very important topic.
Thank you so much, Carol. I'm very happy to be here. And I live to talk about this, so this is wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. So, your work with My Crumby World is really inspiring, as I said. So could you share the story of how your personal experiences led to you creating this empowering brand for young girls?
Absolutely. So if you go back to the very beginning, I can't continue without saying I had my own issues as a girl.
Mm-hmm.
I had struggles in elementary school where I really wanted to fit into this particular friend group. And when I had issues with not necessarily being selected as, being a part of the friend group, I started having chronic stomach aches. And to the extent that my mom actually had me schedule time with a doctor, I had x-rays done, the whole thing. And only to find out that I had what my doctor called nervous stomach.
Ah.
And it was because I knew that what awaited me at school every day. And I knew there was one particular girl who some days she was my absolute best friend, and other days she was my worst enemy. And I didn't know what days those, days would fall on necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some inkling. And so on the days that I knew there might be issues, I wouldn't want to go to school. And I remember actually arriving at school one day when everybody in my class, like all of my friends, my little friend group, all ran from me on the playground when I arrived.
Wow.
And
about how old were you then?
I was in 5th grade at the time.
Okay.
And I tell you, when going back and just thinking about what that felt like, and, and at that time, oh my gosh, it just rocks your whole world when you don't feel like you have anybody that you can turn to. And I think about girls today, because girls don't have this issue at school today. They have this issue at school and at home, because many of them are somehow aligned on social media, or they have phones, and they can't escape the types of cruelty that girls still consistently really target at one another. So I looked back on that, and as I worked my way through my life and then had 2 daughters, mm-hmm. I was having lunch with one of my daughters at school. Mm-hmm. And she was in 4th grade at the time, and I was just observing, because I volunteered a lot. I was observing the girls at the next table, and I watched 2 girls picking on another. And I'm looking around because you could see this girl literally just shrinking in her chair. Mm-hmm. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, where are the lunch aides? Where are the teachers and I realized that at some point, the woman who was actually in charge of this whole section came over, and she saw the girl was upset, and she just said, "All right, knock it off, you guys. I know you're making her upset." And they said, "Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." And off she goes. And they didn't stop. They continued. And of course, I'm watching all of this kind of play out. And I thought to myself, it's amazing how girls are very adept at flying under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
And they know. I mean, these girls continued to pick on this girl. They just didn't do it verbally anymore. They continued doing it non-verbally. And I went home that day and I called my mom and I said, boy, this really made me reflect on my experiences. And I'm watching girls and seeing that literally nothing has changed. And in fact, things have gotten much worse for girls, because girls who want to pick on other girls have so many more tools and weapons at their disposal now. And I said, I really want to do something that kind of targets these girls at a specific age to see if we can't just start combating some of these behaviors. It requires identifying the behaviors and dealing with them. And that takes time. And I know that. So I said, I want to create something that provides tools to parents,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I think parents need. And so I literally went to sleep, and I have always been intrigued by this idea that if you leave a trail of breadcrumbs, you can find your way back when you
Mm.
get lost. And so I decided to kind of create this model that girls are lost,
Mm-hmm.
trying to be what society is telling them, dictating to them that they need to be, and they get lost on this journey. And so I wanted to create breadcrumbs that would leave a trail that they could follow through their stories, their activities, their experiences, their failures, their mishaps, anything that happens between girls, that they could learn from them, and they
Mm-hmm.
would find their way back to who they're supposed to be, to a more authentic version of themselves. So I contacted my mom and told her that I had come up with an idea that I wanted to develop a brand that actually addresses a lot of these problems that girls struggle with in school. And so from that point, I went to bed, and I actually woke up the next morning. And I've always been fascinated by this idea that if you drop a trail of breadcrumbs, that you can find your way back. And so I wanted to develop my own brand of breadcrumbs. And so Penelope Pumpernickel, Rachel Rye, Samantha Sourdough, Whitney Wheat, and PJ, Penelope's little sister, and her dog Pepper were born. And they all have distinct personalities and character traits, and even some kind of personal obstacle that they all have to overcome. And my brand and my stories and everything, it kind of takes girls through this journey of the breadcrumbs as they navigate the world of girlhood. And it teaches girls all about friendship, connection, acceptance, resilience, and lately also how to bake, because someone said to me at some point along the way, are you going to do something with baking? And it's funny because it hadn't even occurred to me at that point to do anything with baking. And all of them have bread heads. If you look, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I thought, I really should do that would be a great hook to get parents, on board with what I'm
Right.
doing. And so during the pandemic, when everybody was learning how to bake bread, I taught myself how to bake all the different kinds of breads. I mean, I just did this deep dive, and I learned how to bake pumpernickel and rye and sourdough. I started maintaining a sourdough starter, and I did all of that, broke it all down, put it into a book in its most simplistic form. And My Crummy Guide to Baking and Friendship Making came to life. And so it's great because it has recipes for all of the breads, but it has so much more than that. There are stories taken from mine and my daughter's experiences with their friends that's included in the book, as well as activities and discussion prompts. Because one thing I learned while teaching myself how to bake is there's a lot of downtime. So if you're working with your little one in the kitchen, and I know so many people during the pandemic found that the kitchen was the place where they were really connecting with their family members. And so if you have the opportunity to work with your little one in the kitchen, you don't want to give that up by, hitting a point where you have time that the dough needs to rise or a time that the bread needs to bake. And so it's a perfect chance to open the book and go to a story and read one of the stories and actually talk about it. I mean, one of my stories is called Second Best, and it's the story of one of the characters telling one of the others that she's her second best friend, taken from my daughter's own personal experience in second grade when she was told she was someone's second best
Oh,
friend.
and nobody wants to be the second best. But yeah, I
No.
like this idea about the breadcrumbs, and just the idea that the breadcrumbs can lead you back to who you really want to
They
be.
are. Yes, you're
Right.
authentic.
And so I was wondering if, starting with your experience, is that what you found to be the case? Is that how you got past that situation? Was there some factor, some intervention, or something like that that turned the tide in the way those girls were treating you?
Oh, yeah. In fact, so my experience in fifth grade was we reached a point, and I say other girls who were experiencing the same feelings and pressures and sadness as I was, we actually came together. Our poor male teacher, bless his
Hmm.
heart, he did not know how to deal with all the girl drama that was going on in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took it upon ourselves to really sit down and say, okay, what is it that we want out of all of this? And all of us said, we all just want to be treated fairly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided that on the first day of sixth grade, we were going to turn the tables on this particular person. And we all kind of banded together and treated her the way that she had been treating us.
Interesting.
And boy, it took half a day until teachers said, all right, we don't know what's going on here, but we are going to sponsor an intervention and you're all going to sit down. And so we sat down as a group and she said, why? And we said, because we want to be heard. We want our feelings known.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that really gave the fact that I realized at that point I had a voice in this and that
Mm-hmm.
I had some way of actually affecting change.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it just, and the other thing it helped us is we kind of balanced out not just the power struggle among the girls, but the fact that girls need to have a group of girls around them that includes more than just one best friend.
Right.
And I talk about that a lot in the material that I have in my books and on my website.
Mm-hmm.
That as parents, there are so many things, there are so many interventions that we can do with our kids. And I think when kids put all of their eggs in just one basket and you have just one best friend, boy, you better hope that they don't have a falling out. Because if they do, then your daughter's going to be left without a friend to turn to, and she's going to come looking for you. And
Right.
that's not a time when you can really be your daughter's best friend. You're trying to guide them and help
Mm-hmm.
them through. And I tell you, I really talk about the importance of trying to kind of make sure you have a good group of friends and that girls don't necessarily have to rank their friendships,
Yeah.
that's something girls do that boys really don't do. And so these
So
are discussions that you can start having with your little ones.
yes, and so I was curious after that experience that you had when you went to have lunch with your daughter and you witnessed that dynamic at the table next to you, what did your daughter already know about that? Had she even noticed it? You did, but was she aware of it?
She did not notice the interaction at lunch. No, she was busy with the table and kind of doing her own thing. We
Mm-hmm.
discussed it later, and she was very aware of the two girls who were involved in that behavior. Oh, she knew. I mean, she said, "Oh, of course, that happens all the time."
Ah,
And and I said, "Does your teacher try to intervene?" And in fact, the way this class was, she was in a self-contained class that kind of they stayed together every year, which is
right.
good and bad. But by the end of the year, there was kind of a big blow up in this particular class because these kids knew each other so well and they had
Mhm.
an issue. It was a full-on bullying issue that happened on the playground that involved not just the girls but the girls and the boys, and it kind of the whole thing kind of came to a head. And that was a moment where the teacher and I had a really interesting conversation about what she was aware of in the classroom. And I said, I'm not happy about the dynamics in this particular classroom. And
Mhm.
given the fact that they're all leaving and going off to middle school next year is probably a good thing. But going forward, this is something that you really should keep an eye on, especially when you have kids that are together for such long periods, and not really watching the power struggles and what happens. Teachers have so much power in a classroom in terms of what they can do, changes
Mhm.
that they can make, alternative seating programs, and all kinds of things you can do to shift that power balance in a
It's
classroom.
absolutely, and then also their attitude toward it also sets the tone as well.
Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
really does.
And
Um,
you do run into a situation where, and I have to say, I have had some very, very good teachers in my kids' experiences and some not as good.
right.
Teachers really have to watch out for not playing favorites. And that happens. My mom and I used to discuss that all the time. My mom said a good teacher never allows him or herself to ever show favoritism or ever develop favorites in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really, I honored that so much that she placed such a value in that. and said, I really I work very hard to try to maintain such equality among these kids in the class because they all come from such different backgrounds. And, and I know there are some teachers that really strive for that
Right.
model, but there are others that
Mm,
don't.
yeah, they say it's not their problem. So I'm curious, as you were thinking through this, the idea of the breadcrumbs and this idea that children would do better if they knew better. Essentially, did you start with your daughter's school or no?
No, what I ended up actually doing, I was really active in PTA. Once I developed my brand and I had my platform, I started going to PTA conferences and
Okay.
I would just kind of get up in front of all the principals and I showed them all. And I started getting invited to go speak at schools, which was fantastic. And
Mm-hmm.
I would talk not just with parents, but I would talk directly to the girls. I had
Mm,
groups where I would work with both kindergarten through second grade and third through fifth grade, and I had a completely different talk depending on which group I was speaking to. But I was getting asked to speak in schools all over this district, not as much with my own personal school
okay.
at that time, but I have since kind of gone back. But I mean, once when I launched it, it kind of went in a different direction. But granted, both of my kids were out of the school by the time I had launched it. From the
Mm,
time I developed it to when I launched, they were not in the school anymore.
mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but I have gone back in and done some workshops at my kids' elementary school.
Awesome. Now, from what you've learned in your research and your experience, what would be some subtle signs that parents could watch out for to know whether their daughter is struggling with cruelty among their peers or social pressure?
So, as a parent, and I know parents really struggle with two. There are a lot of families that have two income parents. I know parents are busy. Parents spend a lot of time on their devices. Kids spend a lot of time on their devices. It is incumbent on parents to really be observant with your kids.
Hmm.
If your child is having a problem with their friends, you're not going to know it if you're not really paying attention.
Right.
Because there are so many immediate indications that something is wrong. And I mean anything from they're more withdrawn, their
Hmm.
grades going down. And I know from my daughter's experience, I started seeing changes in her behavior, changes in her dress, changes in how aggressive she was at home. The fact that
Hmm.
she was so withdrawn and so isolated in her room all the time.
Hmm.
And then, I mean, it was like the icing on the cake was all of a sudden she had this dip in her grades. And at that point, I mean, it was one of those, we really need to sit down and talk. And I actually had talked about this in detail in a book. I was involved in an anthology called She Grows Stronger, where I talk in depth about what I went through with my daughter and reaching that point because
Hmm.
that was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life is really watching my daughter just kind of, slowly change into this very, very isolated and withdrawn person. Now, granted, at the time she was dealing with a chronic illness and which I
Hmm.
kind of get into. I saw cruelty from a completely different vantage point when all of a
Yeah.
sudden my daughter, who was very active in her class and a straight A student and doing all these wonderful things in the middle of seventh grade in middle school, all of a sudden she started fainting. She got sick. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what was going on with her. We ended up having to fly her out and have her tested by a professional, by somebody who's specialized in what
Hmm.
she has.
Hmm.
She ended up missing 3 months of school.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, she got to the point where we had to put her on hospital homebound, and she was so excited just to go back to school. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember she was looking forward to that day like it was Christmas. And the day came and she arrives at school. And I mean, she had a pretty close friend group that knew what was going on with her. But outside of that, there were girls who met her with, "What's wrong with you? You don't look sick."
Oh, wow.
I mean, and then they start developing their own narrative. They
Right.
started asking her questions like, "Were you faking it? Are you
Mm-hmm.
looking for attention?"
Wow.
It just and I mean, talk about the shift. And I mean, at this point, I had launched my business. I was
Mm.
out doing school programs. She got sick. I took a huge step back. because
Hmm.
I just couldn't manage everything.
Right.
And I tell you, having that opportunity to take a step back and see things through her, I mean, it was just like through her, this prism, of what she was going through dealing with girls who didn't understand her illness. And this is an illness that she didn't fully understand herself. So, how
Hmm.
on earth is she supposed to articulate to them?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it wasn't like they were going to be, show a little bit more compassion and have some curiosity and just say, tell us more about it. I mean, they developed their own conclusions, they started their own narrative, and they started spreading rumors. And I had to go down to the school and say, I had a call from one of her teachers who said, "Hey, is she doing all right?" And I said, "What do you mean, is she doing all right? She's at school. I mean, we've got her to a point where she's not
Hmm.
fainting, things are better." And she said, "Well, the rumor around school is that she drank bleach." And I said, seventh grade girls.
Wow. So how
So,
did you move past it?
oh, that I tell you, and that kind of led to her slowly withdrawing and becoming more isolated. I mean, she'd gone back to school and then started getting bullied.
Mm.
And there were many meetings of me and the guidance counselor and me and the school administration, but it really took me developing the kind of connection that I needed to have with her and her having the trust that she needed to have in me.
Mm.
That, and it's almost like when you see these signs in your daughter, you know these things are happening. That is a very, very delicate line to walk, because they have a certain level of trust that you want them to have in you, and you
Mhm.
don't want to step over that line, because I had to figure out, she was at an age where, had she been younger,
Mhm.
I would have been more apt to go in and say, I want to talk to the teacher, I want to have it. But given her age, I had to really say, okay, what are you comfortable navigating alone, and where
Right.
do I need to support you?
Mhm.
Because she did not want me marching down there taking on, the battles with these kids in front of
Mhm.
her. But
Mhm.
I definitely had to make sure that the rumor mill was shut down, and that there was enough information among the teachers and the administration to at least provide to kids who had questions, so that that would not be a part of the narrative going forward.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
those things you can do together, but it obviously takes, on the part of the parent, you have to observe and be aware of what's going on. You have to
Mhm.
make sure you connect with your kid.
Mhm.
You have to ask permission, really, of, where your involvement is going to be and how comfortable they are navigating that,
Right.
and guide them towards, some kind of resolution. So, and if that didn't happen without getting counseling,
Mhm.
counseling for her, getting counseling for me. I mean, it was a probably 10-pronged approach, to
Mhm.
trying to help her, because at some point I felt like I was way out of my league. She reached a depression level that was bad, and we had to get professional help for her. And so that was a big
Mhm.
part of
Worried about that summer slide, that loss of learning kids can experience over summer break? I get it. When my boys were in elementary school, I discovered Summer Bridge Books by Carson De La Rosa Education. Before we hit the beach or the water slide, we hit the books. For just a few minutes a day, these engaging, fun workbooks can help your child keep their skills sharp and their confidence high all summer long. Don't let their hard earned progress slip away this summer. Make sure they start off on the right foot for next school year. From preschool to high school, Summer Bridge is a strong solution. Click the link below in the show notes and help your child bridge the gap this summer with Summer Bridge Books by Carson De La Rosa Education.
Yeah, it's important. And I like the approach you took with her in terms of sitting down and asking how much do you want me to do in this situation, or how do you want to move forward. And you mentioned, with younger children, you're very tempted to just go in there and just go all in, solve the problem for your child. But it really is so important to take your approach. And I did something similar. My son was younger. He was in about second grade when he was talking about someone invading his space, like on the playground and all of that. And he wanted me to call the child's mother. And, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. He even wanted me to come in and talk to the child myself. And so I just said, we're gonna role play and talk about how you're going to let her know that you don't like what she's doing and all of that. It was a girl, but she's much bigger than he was. And through that exercise, it also involved him going and speaking to the teacher and saying, we need to sit down and have a meeting, like the three of us, and talk about this. And and something that I hadn't thought about until then, but in my training for parent education, I had read a book by Rosalind Wiseman, who wrote Queen Bees and Wannabes.
Yes.
And she had talked about not only those I statements about how I feel when you do certain things, it was also what I wish would happen, like how you
Yeah.
would like things to be. And so I incorporated that. And I have to say, and you probably saw this as well, initially it's painful because you want to solve the problem for your children, but going through that, they become great self-advocates. And that was the result for him. He had learning disabilities, so it was going to be important down the road. And I think that's kind of why I started when he was young, because I was like, he's got a long way to go. I already knew that. So, and it sounds like that's the approach that you and your daughter took as well.
Well, and you're exactly right. They have to learn to self-advocate. And it's so much harder when they're younger
Mhm.
because that's something they don't really understand as much. And yet you
Right.
can kind of guide them in that direction and they
Hmm.
learn. And I talk about, I mean, the steps that you use when you're looking for these signs that your daughter might be having a problem and the steps that you take when you're looking at whether or not your daughter is the problem, they're very similar because what
Yes.
you're doing is I mean, you have to kind of look to see if there is a problem and then you have to kind of guide them through it.
Hmm.
But yes, what you did, I think it's spot on. And really, much like when we talk about having a child with a learning disability, having a child with a chronic illness,
Hmm.
we have to advocate on behalf of our kids to get any of these things figured out
Yes.
and to get some kind of a treatment plan. So you have to figure out how to advocate for your kid all the way through that, and they have to learn when it's time to advocate for themselves. And so I think that's commendable, and what you did and the way you handled it was very good. So
Thanks. Now you mentioned also a little bit about social media and how that is really having an impact on the way our children feel about themselves, the way they see themselves. So, what advice would you give for parents trying to help their daughters navigate that in a healthy way, and how do the breadcrumbs figure into that?
well, the breadcrumbs, I've got very active social media platforms that are designed for me to communicate my messaging to adults. The only thing that is really directed to kids, I have a new YouTube channel, and on that YouTube channel, it is just child-friendly content that is really they're videos that kind of promote all of the friendship values and some baking things. But I tell you, with respect to social media, so while doing the research with girls, and I did a deep dive, two books that I recommend across the board. One is Little Girls Can Be Mean, which
Mhm.
is where I get a lot of my information about how to assess, the mean girl behavior and why girls do it. In fact, I got my why from reading this book.
Mhm.
But the other book that I highly recommend to anybody with kids with respect to social media is this one, and that's The Anxious Generation. That's
Mhm.
Jonathan Haidt's book. That is a must read. And it kind of, I mean, I already had an opinion about social media
Mhm.
because of what my daughter went through. Now,
Mhm.
I will say, so you go back to when she goes on hospital homebound, she's in seventh grade.
Mhm.
She had just essentially just gotten a phone. Reason being because she was in after school sports. There aren't any payphones anymore. We decided to get her a phone. We thought we'll wait until middle school. She had after school activities. It seemed to make sense. She gets a phone. She gets sick and she's on hospital homebound. And at that time, I remember we thought, wow, she's really kind of cut off from her entire friend group. I mean, she was at home for months.
Mhm.
And we didn't know at that time, of course, there were all these new things out there like Instagram and Snapchat. And we thought, wow, what a great tool for
Mhm.
her to maintain a connection with her friends.
Mhm.
This is wonderful. We could not have been more wrong
Mm-hmm.
about believing that any of that was going to be good for her down the road. It wasn't. That was a huge mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that because of essentially what ended up transpiring with her. But then you fast forward, and I got a hold of this book and I read it. And it just paints this entire picture that parents need to be aware of what's happening. And essentially, I mean, boys and girls are looking for different things when they are on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And what girls are typically looking for is communion. They want community, they want acceptance, they want to belong, and they find it. They
Right.
find it when they find Instagram and Snapchat. They find it's like boom, instant community.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get the dopamine hit every time they post something and they get a like, it's just like boom, boom, boom. So they constantly are drawn back in, and it slowly kind of reprograms them and starts taking over their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how dangerous it is because it's not real. And these people who are following you are not necessarily your friends. And it just gets them so checked out of their real lives that it's like they become a shell in person. They are never fully present for what they're doing. They're so worried about the next post or the next like or the next text or the next. And it's like they have this mediated reality all of a sudden. And it's just killing their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's just staggering when you look at the rise in anxiety, depression, and suicide rates among girls after
Mm-hmm.
smartphones and social media. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just no question that social media is bad for girls. So his recommendation is that kids should not be on any kind of social media before age 16. And I tell you what, I go back to my kids now and I say, ask them both point blank, what do you think your lives would have been like had you not ever gotten on social media, before you were in high school or later? And they both said, we wish we could go back and do it that way. We would give it up in a heartbeat. And
Yes.
I mean, they talk about how it in so many ways destroyed their psyches, And so when I go out and I talk to parents, it's almost like saying, if there's this drug that kids are, distributing, if, just feeding each other that is bad for your kid, is going to end up making them feel so much worse about themselves and maybe raise their anxiety and depression levels. Would you let your child have it? And they, across the board, parents would say, oh, absolutely not, 100% no way.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they are not monitoring what they're doing on their phones, and they're giving them smartphones way too early. They're giving them access to a world these kids are nowhere near prepared for at an age when their little brains just cannot even wrap their heads around some of the things that are going on. So with respect to social media, there's no gray area for me. I tell parents straight out, keep your kids off of social media as long as
you can.
possible.
Yes.
Period.
I couldn't agree with you more. My goodness. Yeah. What I talk with parents about in terms of the technology as well as social media, it's, I always say, listen, technology is a tool. Sometimes it's a toy. Sometimes it's a teacher, but it should never be a tyrant. We should not allow it to rule our lives. And, there's a lot parents can do as well to model discipline with social media as well as devices.
Oh, real quick. I was listening to a podcast where Jonathan Haidt was being interviewed by someone, and it was interesting and he talks about, I know there's the FOMO that parents have, but my kids, everybody else is on, and I don't want my kid to miss out. And but he has parents that are actually forming little coalitions where they're all deciding, we're not going to get our kids phones before a certain age, or none of us are going to let our kids on social media before, which is nice because then all of a sudden, when your kid has a buddy who's in the same position, you don't feel the FOMO. But they talked about, so this guy who was interviewing Jonathan Haidt said that their family went on vacation and they decided it was going to be a device-free vacation. And they had kids who were either middle school or high school. And the kids, of course, threw fits. They said, no way, we're not giving up our devices. And they said, no, you're going to give up your devices. So they got a bag and they all had to put their phones in a bag and they ziplocked this bag and said, "You'll get this back in 1 week when we finish our vacation." Well, they said that within the first 48 hours it was an absolute nightmare
Right.
because the kids were going through actual withdrawal symptoms because of that
Mhm.
dopamine hit they weren't getting. And the parents were saying, I mean, it got worse for a while where they were begging. First, they were lashing out, they were begging, they were trying to make deals. I mean, it was all of the they went
Mhm,
through
mhm,
every sign of withdrawal. And once they reached the point where they kind of got past it, they said, "Oh my goodness, then we had our kids back."
mhm,
For a full week, we had our kids, and
mhm.
they were dialed in to everything we were doing, and they were fully present and fully engaged, and we had the best vacation we've had in so long. And I
Mhm,
throw that out there. I think that is a challenge to parents
mhm,
to try to do this with your kids. Go
mhm,
on a vacation or take even you can do it at home, but say let's do
mhm.
a phone-free week and just see what happens when you do that with your kids. I think it's transformational. I do.
I definitely think that would be transformational. And I know that in your books, you emphasize resilience and individuality. So what would you say are some practical ways that parents could help their daughters, support them in developing the confidence and having a strong sense of self so that they don't bend to the pressures to conform, and especially when you have the pressure coming from social media as well?
Of course, steering them away from phones and social media is big. It's interesting because so before I actually put out My Crummy Guide to Baking and Friendship Making, I have a book that's completely done that's just kind of sitting and waiting that I'm looking forward to releasing. And it's called My Crummy Guide to Being Different. And the
Okay.
whole point of this book is
Mhm.
I want to kind of move away from this notion that being different is something that's bad.
Right.
I think that parents need to start embracing those things that make us different is what makes us interesting. The
Right.
quote unquote flaws that we have. And the key with girls is really trying to steer them. And I know it's hard because you see so many influences in society that really dictate how important it is to conform. I mean, we are showing girls in every possible way that they need to look alike and dress alike and buy if you want to fit in you got to buy these kinds of shoes or wear this kind of it's I mean everything is set toward conformity. And really this is a perfect opportunity. And I know, I mean, when I launch this book, I really want to make a big deal about the fact that I think that parents need to start celebrating those things in your kids that make them different and focus on those things before they start to forget them. It's almost like you want to kind of look at anything that makes them stand out and sometimes and you'll see it. I know there are things that kids don't like. I never liked certain things about myself. I didn't like that I had a really strong chin when I was growing up.
Mhm.
Kids would
Mhm.
make how kids are, they make fun of those things.
Absolutely.
They look for
I
anything.
absolutely know red hair, freckles, and all
And
of
that
these. That was mine. But I'm curious, what is the target age group for this book? Like,
So my typical target age range is anywhere between 4 and it could be 10 or 11.
okay.
Like in the baking book, there's a lot of science concepts in here. And I say that if you have older girls, it's great if the older girls can work with the younger girls and mentor them because there's just some information in here that gets a little bit in depth for the younger girls.
Sure.
So, but younger girls will still appreciate the stories and
Hmm.
the lessons. But in terms of like the absolute sweet spot in terms of my target
Right.
age is like right at about 8 or 9 years old, where girls are reading to learn.
Got it.
And the other reason that I say that's kind of my target.
Hmm.
So when I was first doing the research and I was reading this book, The Little Girls Can Be Mean, these two authors, doctors Anthony and Lindert, they talk about the fact that there's a lot of research that's being done about why girls behave the way they do. And when, I mean, they talk about relational aggression and when it starts, which it starts as early as kindergarten or before.
Hmm.
But they said, well, there's a lot of research out there about this. They said there's not a whole lot of research about anything that's being done in terms of resources or tools for parents to try to curb and change the behaviors right at about third grade. Because at third grade, girls' identities are not fully set
Mm-hmm.
and they still respect authority figures.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like a perfect age to really try to steer the behaviors and to reinforce the positive things that girls can do. And so that was like, I mean, it was just like light bulb moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's my target.
Sure.
Granted, I'm never going to dismiss the girls that are older or younger because I think there are opportunities for growth at every age.
Mm-hmm.
But right at that age is it's really a perfect chance for parents to see a lot of the things that are going on with their girls and say, okay, you know what? This is a great thing. This might be working for you, but this maybe we could tweak a little bit and it might end up resulting in more positive relationships with your peers and better
Mm-hmm.
communication with your friends. That's kind of why I target that particular age group because I think it will make the most difference.
Well, I know another talking point for you is helping parents to recognize or determine if their own daughter
Is the mean
is the
girl.
mean girl. So, what
Oh,
might be some behaviors or attitudes that
yeah.
parents could be on the lookout for? And then, how do they address it when their child is the mean girl?
This is a really good question and one that comes up. In fact, I was out giving a talk at a school and standing in front of a bunch of parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about, the problems that girls are having with their friends at school. And it was interesting because I was going through this whole thing and this woman raised her hand and said, my daughter doesn't have these problems with her friends. And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, one of two things could be at play. I said, maybe she's having problems, but she doesn't feel comfortable bringing these problems to you. I
Mm-hmm.
said, or maybe she is the problem. And boy, you could hear this hush.
Whoa.
And the mom came up to me afterwards, and funny because other parents kind of came up and said, thank you for saying that. It was like,
Oh.
but she came up and said, interesting. What is it that I need to look out for? And I said, okay, here's the deal. It's an interesting thing with girls because we want our girls to be assertive. And
Mhm.
that is it's kind of a hard thing that we want girls to stand up for themselves and assert
Mhm.
themselves. And we definitely want to raise a generation of assertive girls. Well, there's a line between
Mhm.
assertive and aggressive.
Mhm.
And you have to start really observing their behavior, not just in certain situations, because there can be situations where your daughter needs to assert herself because somebody else is maybe kind of pushing her in a way that she doesn't want to be.
Mhm.
So and that's standing up for yourself in any situation is important. So we want to teach our girls to be assertive.
Mhm.
But if they are going beyond that and they are entering the realm of aggressive,
Aggressive.
you're going
Mhm.
to see that not just in her friend group, you're going to see it in other situations as well. You're going to see it among family members. You're
Mhm.
going to see it in other areas of her life.
Mhm.
So you have to observe to see if it's consistent across different situations.
Mhm.
You need to then connect with her and sit down and start talking about. Interesting. I saw, when you were talking with so and so, this is maybe how things came across. Can you kind of tell me your side of things and how so trying to connect and be happy if she's willing to reciprocate and start talking with you about it and say, I am so glad that you feel comfortable
Mhm.
talking to me about this. It's like I had to tell my husband, you need to start this young because you want to get in the habit of them bringing things to you. And I remember
Mhm.
when our daughters were in like first or second grade, it was 9:30, we were in bed, and one of my oldest came in and she said, "Oh, mom, I forgot I needed to tell you." Didn't she started to tell me about so and so did. And my husband started to say, "Hey, it's
Right, right,
past
right.
bedtime." And I said, "Hold on." I put my hand and I said, "Hold on just 1 second," because I
Yeah.
thought, "Okay, she can't sleep because
Mhm.
this is on her mind. This is
Mhm.
something that she needs to get off her chest because
Mhm.
she wants to go to sleep.
Mhm.
Okay, tell me what's going on." And
Right.
I really advise parents, make sure you have a habit of letting them bring you the small stuff
Mhm.
so that when the time comes, they're going to bring you the big stuff. And that's where they start bringing you stuff that really has much more impact on the things that they're doing. So that connection is so key.
I
And
agree.
then you have to, and I talk about something that you brought up earlier, have to guide them. And the way that you guide them on how to behave going forward is by perhaps role playing. You can make it fun. You can say, okay, you know what? Say I'm your friend so and so, and this is
Mm-hmm.
the situation. How do you handle it?
Mm-hmm.
And role play it, and
Mm-hmm.
let her know, I don't know, that didn't really sound that good. That sounded kind of mean. That was a little too aggressive.
Right, right.
Role play. And when you role play, you use 3 R's. You recognize the behavior. You have to make sure she recognizes, okay, yeah, I stepped over it. That behavior probably isn't acceptable. Take responsibility for it and rectify it. Okay, if you know you stepped over, you realize it was your fault, you have to own up and apologize.
Mm-hmm.
And then you support them and you go forward by saying, okay, let's get your friends together. Let's have you guys talk it out, making sure that you know that she's kind of role played it enough and that
Mm-hmm.
she to
Mm-hmm.
be able to handle it responsibly, and maybe get the parents involved if it calls for it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really, it's very simple. I mean, it's observing, connecting, guiding, and supporting. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. I think we can end on that note. That sounds like a powerful message for parents. Is there anything else that you want to leave them with? Just because I know that there are many out there that are overwhelmed by the challenges of raising daughters, children in particular, children, of course, but daughters in today's complex social landscape.
it's
Any
tough.
any other closing thoughts you have?
I do. I'm in the process of kind of redesigning my website.
Okay.
I'm going to be putting a lot of resources on my website for parents to take advantage of. I'm going to have something on there called the My Crummy Connection Kit,
Mm-hmm.
which gives you a little blueprint of how to connect better with your daughter and things you can do. And it has ideas, not just, it's like some baking ideas, some, quick recipes maybe to do together, things that you can do on a regular basis, and ways you can support yourself in connecting with your kids. So this
Mm-hmm.
is it's called the Crummy Connection Kit, and it will be available on my website. I would say give it about a week, but definitely check back with my website.
Sure.
And the other thing is, I on my YouTube channel, I put videos for parents. My how to deal with your daughter if she's the mean girl, that's out there. So if any parents are watching and want to see a replay or want to recommend that to someone, you can find it on my YouTube channel.
Okay, and as we're speaking about that, what are your social media handles? And tell us exactly the name of your YouTube channel so that our listeners will know where to go.
It's very easy. It's My Crummy World. Everything is either My Crummy World or at My Crummy World. And that's MyCrumbyword, My Crummy World. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn is my name, but Pinterest, YouTube, TikTok, all of it. And again, I say, just definitely, if you're interested in resources for parents, I'm going to start putting an abundance of resources on my website so that you can come to my website and get all kinds of information. Because I want to help parents raise very healthy, happy, kind, and very well-adjusted girls. And I just want to see us work together to try to create this generation of girls that are going to do a better job toward one another.
I love it. I love it because we need these are future leaders, and we absolutely need them to be healthy, well-rounded, well-adjusted, and considerate of
Yes,
others. So
yes.
I absolutely appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you so much for joining me today, Shannon. And whether you're watching or listening today, thank you for just sitting and taking in this enlightening conversation that I have had with Shannon. And I hope that today's discussion gave you some valuable insights into how you can support your daughter's emotional well-being and foster confidence in herself in this very challenging world. And as Shannon reminds us, connection really is the key. And so we've got to build the bridges for the next generation. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss another empowering conversation. And join us over in the Parenting 411 community over on Facebook, where you can talk about these and other topics that are on parents' minds. And just visit facebook.com/groups/the Parenting 411 community. And until next time, take care, stay connected, and remember, it's never too late to be the parent you want to be. Talk to you again next time. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you so much.
We bring you this episode for the purpose of information and entertainment only. It is not the intent or purpose of the Parenting 411 podcast or Carol Maletta to provide an exhaustive reference or guide on all aspects of parenting, childcare, and family life. You are strongly encouraged to read all available information, consult medical or other appropriate professionals, and pursue all reasonable means to learn as much as possible about parenting, to complement what you gain here, and then tailor the information to meet your individual needs. Yes, parenting is a serious matter, though it is not an exact science. The context and insights offered in this and every episode represent an account of knowledge and personal experiences of the host and any featured guests for the viewers' and listeners' information and consideration. The host and guests do not guarantee to our viewers or listeners any specific parenting outcomes from this episode or taking actions described here.